Let's make a start then. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Mond. I'm the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. And I think tonight is rather historic because it must be the first time where we've had a senior member of the Scottish National Party address a large Jewish group. So I'm briefly going to introduce John Mason, our guest speaker for this evening. Then I'm going to ask him some questions. And after that, it'll be your turn to ask questions. And as usual, when you ask questions, please go to the bottom of your screen and raise your virtual hand. If you just wave your hand in the air like that, I won't see you. If you raise your virtual hand, I definitely will see you, and I will call on you to ask a question. We're going to carry on till around about 8 o'clock. 10 past 8 will be the absolute latest. So just to give you some idea of timing. Okay, so our speaker this evening, John Mason, is a former Scottish National Party Member of Parliament between 2008 and 2010. He served also for many years on Glasgow City Council. And he's been, for the last, I think, 13 years, since 2011, he's been a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Scottish National Party. And of course, as most of us know, I think without being unfair to John, many of us might not have heard of him before a few weeks ago. But a few weeks ago, he actually went out and said that Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza. And he earned the wrath of his colleagues in the SNP as a result. So I'm now going to ask John some questions. To begin with, John, what actually attracted you when you first joined to join the SNP in the first place?
Well, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to take part this evening. Been looking forward to this. So yes, I mean, when I wasn't terribly political, I was always interested in politics. Like when I was a student, I'm an accountant by background. And then through the church, I was working in Nepal in the 1980s. And that changed my thinking a bit. Nepal is quite a small country with big neighbours. And I had colleagues from Canada and New Zealand and countries like that, which are also small countries with big neighbours. And they all want to be independent. So that made me think, well, actually, Scotland could do this. We could stand on our own 2 feet. And so when I came back, I joined the SNP and got more involved. And that's why I'm in the SNP, is obviously to get Scottish independence.
Yes, thank you. And in your opinion, what is the cause of what I can only describe as visceral loathing of Israel among so many SNP members? And how deep does this actual hatred go within the party? Is it just some of the senior politicians, or is it much deeper than that?
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a lot in that, and we can talk about that. Maybe that's the main question.
Yes, it's the fundamental question.
Yes. So, I mean, the SNP traditionally was a very big tent, call it what you want, with this common goal of Scottish independence, but with a wide range of people within it. So on economic issues, a bit more to the left, a bit more to the right, and with very few kind of essentials that people had to actually, sign up to. But I think it has become a bit more intolerant over the years, and that's not just in relation to Israel, that's in relation to other issues. For example, I'm pro-life, and there's very little intolerance if you criticize abortion and things like that. So I think that, again, partly reflects the wider society, as Scotland, I mean, which traditionally used to be quite a church-going country, and is now quite rapidly during my lifetime become a very secular country. I just think there's less tolerance, and there's certainly less sympathy towards Israel than I think there used to be. I would have to say, I mean, I don't think it's just the SNP there's a problem. I think Labour would be in a very similar position, certainly in Scotland and perhaps in the UK. The Greens would be even more vociferous against Israel. And they've tended to be at the forefront of leading criticism and so on. The Conservatives maybe a slightly different position. So I think it's a wider problem than just the SNP, but and I mean, some people, I suppose there's a kind of Scottish tradition, maybe British tradition, of supporting the underdog, and there's a perception that the Palestinians in this case are the underdog. But I would say the majority of people, including politicians, are just really going with the flow. And it's seen that this is the kind of current fashion as we cheer on the Palestinians and we give Israel a kicking. And so on and so forth. Yeah, he is. I don't know if I've got a sound problem there. I think, and there's, one of the major football teams, they'll wave Palestinian flags, but I doubt that very many folk at that, would really have thought it through at all, to be frank.
Okay. For those of us who are not that familiar with SNP politics, earlier this year, there was a possibility, there was a lot of discussion as to who the next leader was going to be. And there was a lady called Kate Forbes, who was a prominent potential candidate, who was somewhat more conservative leaning and is certainly more, shall we say, of the more evangelical Christian type background than many of the others. And we know, those of us who are familiar with the Christian community elsewhere in the UK, know that the evangelical Christians tend to be very pro-Israel. And so I want to ask John whether if Kate Forbes had become leader of the SNP, whether it would have made a difference.
Would it have made any difference? I don't know. I mean, I think this has been longer running than since, Kate's been involved. And I'm not sure that the leader of the party, and I guess this is true of other parties as well. I mean, we tend to think that they are the one with all the power, but very often they are the one that are having to try and keep everybody within the party on board. And, as you suggested in your previous questions, some of this has been quite deep-seated and quite long-running. So I don't think Kate would have changed that. I mean, there might have been a little bit of a change of tone. And we're probably going to talk about Angus Robertson, who's the minister who met the deputy ambassador. And, he also has had, he's not coming at it from any faith perspective, but it's just part of his job to meet people from different parties. So, and John Swinney, to be fair, who's the current leader, I mean, it was probably slightly different if people know when Kate Forbes stood, it was against Hamza Yusuf, whose wife is Palestinian, as I understand it, and who was not really seen as being very neutral. But somebody like John Swinney, who now is the leader, no, I don't think he's anti-Israel in any kind of way. He would be much more the idea of the big tent. I think there was quite a lot of opposition to Kate, just the idea of somebody with more small c conservative values, Christian faith, and so on, being the leader. But she got very close, and amongst the membership, and I think that's an interesting point, that she got almost 50% of the membership vote, who obviously were relaxed about her views. But amongst the parliamentarians and amongst the activists, she did not get practically any support at all. And, I think that says something about our party and probably says something about other political parties as well, that the danger is that the parliamentarians, the elected people and the very active people, become out of touch even with their own membership and potentially from the wider party. And I mean, I wouldn't claim for a minute that I've got support for my positions, in my local membership or even amongst the public, but there's certainly a lot more support amongst the wider public than maybe there is amongst the party activists. I don't know if that quite answers your question. I mean, it's difficult to know what would have happened if...
Yeah, I understand. It's just a hypothetical question, because I'm aware of particularly I knew that Kate Forbes was an evangelical Christian, and I knew that the Jewish community and Israel get a lot of support elsewhere in the UK from the Christian firmament. So just moving on, you mentioned to me before the meeting that you were in Israel in the early 1990s. What was your perception then? And if you went to Israel again, which I hope you will, what would you like to do? What would you like to see? What particular interesting things about Israel interest you that would draw your attention and want you to actually go and see what's happening?
Okay, well, I did have a very good visit. It was a holiday, so I was being a tourist, and I was obviously interested in religious sites and seeing like the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, which I'd heard about for so long, in Jerusalem itself. And I stayed in Tiberias and stayed in Jerusalem, visited places like Bethlehem and Nazareth, Masada, Yad Vashem. I mean, I also find the history fascinating. I made a big mistake at school not studying history, and I've spent all my time since then fascinated by history. And this summer, my holiday was in the Baltic states, and I was, there's a whole Vilnius, what used to be, I think, called the Jerusalem of the North. and just seeing the Jewish history there and the Holocaust and so on. So all of that absolutely fascinates me. And so I did have a tremendous time and saw a lot of what I wanted to see when I was in Israel. If I was to go back, and it has been suggested, the embassy and others have suggested I should go, and there have been,
And so you should.
and so I should. Okay, Scottish politicians going to Israel. I'm not against it. I think I would, I would be interested in meeting politicians. Basically, that would be one of the main things. And because I didn't, as I say, I went as a tourist last time. So if I went again, probably more interaction with local people and discussing the situation.
Okay, thanks. So now if we look at Scotland beyond the SNP, what is your view about attitudes to Israel just among ordinary Scottish folk? What is your view as to what they're thinking?
Well, I don't think it's as negative as, say, SNP, Green and Labour, if we take them as the three parties who are perhaps most sceptical and have tended to be most pro-Palestine. But as I say, a lot of people have gone with the flow, with what they see as the fashion at the moment. And, if the fashion changed, I think a lot of people and politicians as well would just change with it. I do fear that there's a broader issue about people not really standing their ground at times, and politicians of all parties, very much swaying. I mean, I think that, as I kind of mentioned before, there's the fact that fewer people are going to church these days, and so I do think there's a spiritual side to this that, you know, my understanding of scripture is that people are in rebellion. We are all in rebellion against God. And the Jews have been seen as God's representatives. And I think that my feeling is that's one of the reasons why Israel and the Jews are hated so much and have been for so long. And in some cases, Christians are in that space as well, for example, in China, because anyone who stands up to some of these governments and doesn't just follow the government is going to be in trouble, whether that be China or Pakistan or Iran or wherever it might be. So that's if you like, that's my underlying understanding of the whole thing. And as Scotland has drifted away, because I think it would have been some of the Scottish churches, as you suggested, would have been very supportive of Israel in the past. And as the country has drifted away from religion generally, I think that has probably decreased. So I suppose that's true throughout much of Europe. I don't know if Scotland's really that much of an outlier, but we've maybe moved faster from a more conservative position to a more what they call progressive or liberal position on a whole range of issues, and this would be one of them.
Thank you. Overall, have you detected a rise in anti-Semitism in Scotland since the events of the 7th of October last year?
Well, I think those I'm in contact with amongst the Jewish community would say they do feel there's more antagonism than there used to be. Now, I personally find it difficult to pin that down as to, is that anti-Semitism or is it, strong criticism of the present Israeli government? And I know that a lot of Jewish people would be critical of the present Israeli government, and people in Israel are critical of that as well. So I find it hard to say, but I certainly would say some of the criticism is anti-Semitism. Because I think that is very deep lying and through most societies has been there for a very long time, and that would include Scotland. I mean, we used to pride ourselves in being very tolerant and, not having had the same problems with minorities as other countries have had, but I don't really think we're that much different. And when you look at the way that the country's going, but in a sense, I'm not the best person to answer that, but I do know that a number of Jewish people would be saying they feel more threatened and under pressure than they have in the past. I have to say, I was down in London in January and was somewhat surprised that it did appear that the feeling amongst the Jewish community was the same. I went with a friend to a synagogue one Friday evening, and there was only about 20 at the synagogue and 3 security people, and that really struck me that the situation not just in Scotland but throughout the UK is problematic.
Yes, I would tend to agree. There was a case in Edinburgh 7 or 8 months ago of a young man wearing a Jewish tie around his neck who was told by the police not to go near a group of demonstrators. for his own safety. And we've had a number of similar incidents like that south of the border. And of course, you've had marches in Glasgow and Edinburgh too, just as we've had marches in London and elsewhere. So yes, I do certainly appreciate those high
I
levels
mean,
of
the other side is that I had a Jewish friend staying just the other week up from London, and he was not hiding the fact he was Jewish, let's say. And, you know, we were all around things. We went to museums, we went to Edinburgh Festival, we went to a number of different things. And I think he would say he had no problems, you know, at all with that. So that's the positive side. But I mean, I fully accept there's a negative side.
Yes, thank you. I think probably everyone on this call would agree you were very brave to speak out as you did in defense of Israel and confirming that there is no genocide going on. What persuaded you, what drove you to do this? And are there people, even in the SNP, who are quietly supportive? I'm sure there are people outside the SNP who are very supportive, but to what extent? Tell us a bit more about the support you, firstly, why you did it, and secondly, the support you're getting for having done so.
Well, in the first place, I think because it was true. I mean, it had crossed my mind. And I mean, lots of words get used loosely nowadays, which used to have a fixed meaning. I mean, everything's an emergency and everything's a crisis. So that's two words that we misuse. But in relation to Israel, I think both genocide and apartheid are words that get bandied around. And, you know, people, I think, have lost the perspective of as to what these two words actually mean and what they mean in other countries and currently mean in other countries. I mean, you know, I know that Christians in Pakistan and Iran are second-class citizens. You know, that's much more of an apartheid system than anything we're seeing in Israel. Why I did it or why I speak out, and, you know, as I say, this is not the first time I've been unpopular for taking a stand on something, you know, does come back a lot to my faith, because we look at Moses, who was not keen to go back to Egypt and lead the Israelites out. We look at Gideon, who was not keen, you know, and they were told not to be afraid, not to fear. And that's very much part of our understanding. I mean, there's many, many examples in scripture of being told not to fear, that we will be given strength by God. And I strongly believe that, and that as I get older, that has been my experience. So I'm not saying I enjoy being unpopular, and you cannot fight every battle that comes along. There's lots of battles I just stay out of. But on this particular issue, I did feel I was going to take a stand, and so be it.
Well, you've acquired a large number of friends and supporters as a result of having done so, I can assure you. I've got a few more questions still to ask, but can I just say to everyone, please start raising your virtual hands if you want to ask questions, because we'll be giving you plenty of time to ask questions shortly. Okay, don't be shy about raising your virtual hands. Okay, my next question is if you could give us an update on what is the latest on the disciplinary situation that you're facing.
Yes, well, I was just almost 3 weeks ago, I was suspended by the group. Now, that's the MSPs. So we have a group of about just over 60 SNP MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. So after I'd tweeted on the Friday night, they managed to suspend me at 11 o'clock the following morning. So there obviously wasn't a lot of reflection went into that. And then a few days later, the party as a whole suspended me. So that means I'm currently an independent MSP technically, and I am not a member of the SNP technically. And I have to say, in my mind, I've been involved with the SNP for over 30 years, so I still feel part of the SNP. But that's the kind of technical position, and it will be the party. The party has a kind of disciplinary system, committees, and so on, and they are meant to be meeting with me and I suppose hearing my case and hearing the opposition and deciding what to do about it. And they said that would be soon, but that was a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't heard any more since. So I'm just kind of waiting. So I'm carrying on. I mean, I'm still an MSP. I still deal with my local constituents. I'm still in the Parliament in committees. So in one sense, it's made very little difference, but I am technically not in the SNP.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure how much of the next question you're able to tell me because it might be confidential, but your colleague Angus Robertson had a meeting with the new deputy Israeli ambassador, Daniela, I forget her surname, she's very
Grudsky.
Sorry?
Grudsky.
That's it, yes, you corrected me. She's only been in her job a few weeks. And I wondered how he found that meeting, whether he felt it was productive, what was discussed to the extent you're allowed to tell me, to tell us, and next steps, really. I think it's great that he met her, by the way.
Yes, well, I met her the day before, so I met her on the Wednesday. He met her on the Thursday. So I can't really tell you anything about what Angus Robertson discussed with her other than what's in the public domain.
Right.
I imagine it's largely what I discussed with her, which was a wide range of things. She was very keen to speak to us about the humanitarian aid that Israel is either providing or allowing to pass through Israel to Gaza. And I mean, I did ask her about what were the opportunities for peace talks. I've previously asked the ambassador that in an online meeting, and I've previously met other deputy ambassadors. So this was hardly, for me personally, this was not a first or anything. And I would meet almost anyone who contacts me and wants to meet me. So I didn't particularly see it as a big deal, but I did realise that I would be one of the very few in the SNP who was perhaps willing to meet her. But I think Angus, he's since apologised for maybe not just focusing on a ceasefire and covering other topics as well. But I mean, personally, I think we should be talking. There should be a lot more talking and a lot less fighting going on in a whole range of places, in Ukraine as well. And we'll never solve anything. And I did say this to the deputy ambassador that eventually, I mean, Britain spoke to the IRA eventually, and for those of us that grew up, the IRA were not a popular or good organization by any stretch of the imagination, but eventually they had to talk to each other and reach some kind of peace solution. And I believe that's the case in Ukraine. I believe it's the case, at some stage there's going to have to be talks in relation to Israel and Palestine.
I think that probably a number of us would say that there is a huge difference between the IRA and Hamas. If you think of what the IRA tried to do, their objective was not to kill every single Protestant living in the United Kingdom. Their aim was a united Ireland. Hamas's aim, on the other hand, is to get rid of every single Jew in Israel and ultimately the world. So that's what makes it somewhat different.
I fully accept it's different, and your answer is exactly the same or virtually the same as Daniela Grudsky's answer as well. So I'm not for a minute saying that you could be the next ambassador. So I'm not saying it's the same situation. My point would be that, and she kind of agreed that at some point there would need to be talks, but she questioned who it was possible for Israel to talk to at the moment. Yes. And I'm not arguing with that. That's absolutely fair point. But my own feeling is, I mean, Norway made an effort in the past some time ago, 20, 30 years ago, to have peace talks in Oslo. And I would prefer that both Scotland and Britain was in that place of trying to promote peace rather than backing either side. Angus Robertson, to be fair to him, he previously tried to promote peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I would prefer to see Scotland and the UK in that place rather than just cheering on the Palestinians, as appears to be the case.
Yeah, a small point just came out of what you said. When you were speaking about the delivery, or either you or Angus Robertson or both of you were speaking about the delivery of humanitarian aid, was it ever made clear that one of the big barriers to humanitarian aid getting through was Hamas itself?
Yes, I mean, I'm certainly clear about that. I wouldn't need any convincing on that point. I think Ms. Grudsky, the deputy ambassador, was emphasising, what Israel was doing rather than what wasn't happening.
Right.
But I mean, it seems very clear to me that yes, a lot more aid could have been going in over many years to Gaza, and certainly currently, if it wasn't for what Hamas are doing.
Thank you. My last question before I throw it open, looking to the future, how do you see relations between Scotland and Israel developing? A big picture question, really.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, do tend to be optimistic, and I would hope that they would return, and that there are good relations in specific sectors. Israeli companies involved in our economy, and although there's opposition to that as well. And I would certainly hope that there could be good relations. I mean, there's a lot in common, I would say. I mean, Israel, and I mean, Scotland has a set of universities which are pretty respected around the world, and Israel has universities, research and development things which are world leading. So, and in the scheme of things, we're both quite small countries compared to China or the States or Russia or any of them. So I think there's lots of room, and that's why we have this cross-party group. I can't remember if I mentioned that already, but we do have a cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament that's similar to an all-party group at Westminster, for those that are familiar with that. And that's trying to promote cultural and trade relations and that side of things between Scotland and Israel. And in fact, last night we focused on a book which had been written. Now it's a historical novel, and I have forgotten the name and the author. But so that was in the cultural space that we were looking at last night.
Thank you. Right, questions. Carl Cohen, you were the first to have your hand up, and after Carl, Laura Lilienthal. Carl. Sorry, Carl, you're on mute. Steve, can we unmute Carl, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
No question. I gained some kind of notoriety of never asking questions. I would like to say a few things to you, dear guest. Kol hakavod, as they say in Hebrew, a big bravo and thank you, toda rabah, for being what you are. I hope you are not blushing. We won't be able to see it. You are a member of a very small, an elite group of wonderful people that we call Hasidei Olam, or righteous among nations, among Gentiles. It's a great honor to address you, to speak to you. And you do not need any persuasion. You do not need any outside information more than other people. It's all there in your heart and your soul. And we thank you for that. There is one little addendum. Again, very kind, because you are so humane and trying to accommodate the two sides. There are no two parties to this conflict. One side wishes the elimination of the other. There is no common subject. That side has to be destroyed, just like the Allies did during the Second World War. No, there is no army, more moral army and humane than the Israeli army. I know, I served in it. No army, no precedent in warfare that the victorious, the powerful side is providing polio vaccination. Can you imagine the Allies in Berlin vaccinating the little Germans outside Dresden? No. So the Jews, it's always different. It's, as you call it, reinventing the wheel.
Okay.
I wish to thank you again for everything you do. I would like to meet you and to shake your hand. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. I've just asked Laura and Barry Epstein to ask their questions, then I'll come back to John. Laura.
Hi, yeah, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but what I'm really interested in is, do politicians not actually know the history of Israel? It was created at the end of the British Empire, as was, for example, Pakistan. Because what seems to be, so all my friends who I basically aren't speaking to anymore because they've become anti-Israel and blah, 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 their thing was that Israel occupies this land illegally. Now, and that they persecute the so-called Palestinians, blah, blah, blah. Now, Pakistan, who have persecuted, I know people that were Indians that left, had to flee Pakistan. This never gets mentioned, never. So do politicians really do not understand the history? Why does this never get corrected when other politicians are being addressed? Why is the fact that Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, dragging out however many thousands of Jews from Gaza, why is this never spoken about? And the connection to Iran. You can't have a peace agreement with a group of, with Hamas, who are funded ultimately by Iran. who are extremely dangerous. So why are the historical facts never brought up? Do politicians really not understand that the Palestinian, so-called Palestinian flag was created in 1964 and it was a creation of
Absolutely. Yep.
and Yasser Arafat? Why does this never, ever, ever get pointed out in court? Why is the historical fact, it's anti-Semitism, obviously, because why do people not want to know the truth? This drives me crazy. This drives me crazy when I listen to politicians, they never gets brought up that, and Israel was supplying Gaza with water and etc., etc. And there were thousands of Gazans coming into work in Israel, and they turned their back on the Israelis. I have family that live near Gaza.
Okay, Laura, thank you very, very much.
Sorry
Barry
for being, I get really.
don't worry.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate
We've got the point, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Barry Epstein, could you put your camera on and ask your question? Barry Epstein. No? Oh, yes, you're there. No, you're not there. Okay, John, would you like to answer those first two questions first? Well, the first one wasn't really a question.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for the first comment and encouragement, and I take the point. I do take the point that we're not talking about two equivalent sides here. I mean, clearly there's going to be no solution to this unless something happens in Iran. And, you know, again, I say I'm optimistic. I pray for what's happening in Iran. There is a considerable change. You know, quite a lot of Muslims have become Christians, for example. We have Iranians in Scotland who have fled. So, I mean, I would hope that at some point there will be a change in Iran. But anyway, that's maybe a bit optimistic.
Yeah.
The second point, I mean, I think there's a wider question here about politicians. And, you know, I do not set myself up as the way politicians should be. But frankly, it's not only in this issue that politicians are not interested in the facts. I mean, you said, do they not know the history? Well, I suspect a lot of us don't know the history very well. But I think worse than that is the choice not to just to ignore certain facts. And frankly, we get that with the economy as well, that even today we had debates in the Scottish Parliament, and the same politicians will be saying, well, we should, I'm not trying to be party political tonight, but, you know, we should spend more money, but we should pay less tax. And as an accountant, I just don't understand that. I mean, that is just ignoring the facts. You can want to spend more money, but then we have to find it somewhere or whatever. And so I'm afraid there's a wider problem in politics that people come up with slogans and they come up with all sorts of things, and that none of that is based on the facts. And it certainly applies big time when people are discussing Israel. I think most people have really made up their minds before they look at the facts, and then just kind of jump in and use all sorts of words which I've already mentioned, like apartheid and genocide. So I hope that's not too pessimistic, but I'm trying to be realistic. Obviously, anything we can do, and I mean, can I give a shout out to Sammy and Vicky Steen in Glasgow, because they run a stall in Buchanan Street in Glasgow every Saturday. That's our main shopping centre. And one of the things they're trying to do is educate people, basically, because people do not know the facts. And I think they've had some success, that at least they've softened people who just were carrying around some slogans in their head and whatever. And then when they actually engage and they speak to Sammy and Vicky and their team, you know, some of them at least begin to open up a little bit. And so I think we have to work at that. But it's certainly, you know, I'm afraid it's not the only issue where politicians are not looking very objectively at the facts.
Sure, that's right. I'm going to take the next three questions, John, and then I'll come back to you again. So Barry Epstein first. Barry, you're here. You're on mute, Barry. You're on mute.
I think someone's helping them sort it.
Yep,
Can you hear me?
now. Yep, we can hear you now, Barry.
Oh, thank you. John, you're a great friend of Jews. You're a great friend of Israel. I've got to pull you up on something. You should point out to people that are not familiar with the beautiful game, there are two football teams in Glasgow, one of which at all home games flies the flag of Israel, and if anybody criticise them, they are likely to receive. The second thing I ask you, John, is that when I was a small lad, the best primary and secondary education in the world was delivered north of Hadrian's Wall, and people opened a history book and learnt about history. When will that be restored? The third,
Sorry, you froze.
that in Israel,
Yeah.
one of the greatest Christian Zionists acknowledged is Brigadier General Orzi Wingate, who led the foundations of the great Israeli army. And the fourth point, you talk, there are 16 million of us in the world, John. We would fit comfortably inside the populace of Rio de Janeiro, Jakarta, and Tokyo, and the rest of the world's population is 8 billion. Who are the minority?
Barry, thank you. Lawrence, you've got your hand up. Lawrence. Lawrence is our vice chairman.
Right, totally different issue. If we look at both our election and the upcoming US election, politicians are steering a course to avoid upsetting the Muslim vote. The question I have for you is our liberal democracy at risk from intolerance and cancel culture, and the very thing which you appear to be suffering from?
Okay, before John comes in, I'm going to ask Laura Gordon to ask her question, and then I'll ask John to reply to the three. Laura.
Hi, I think Lawrence's question was absolutely brilliant. First of all, I would like to say, John, I remember you from Glasgow City Council. I remember you from the Scottish Parliament as well. And I'd just like to say huge kudos to you for putting your head above the parapet, standing up for what's right in an incredibly toxic environment. And I can't imagine what it's been like for you over the past few weeks. So thank you for that. My question to you was kind of similar to what Laura and Barry have said about what can be done to educate people. You know, we are at risk of, just being a completely blinkered society. And I'm just wondering, we're hearing about Holocaust education being cancelled in schools. You know, how can we create an environment of actual kind of embracing knowledge rather than just kind of being fed what the media want to feed people? And the second part of the question, I hope you'll bear with me, Gary, is just to find out whether or not John has any cross-party support, or whether or not even there's much support in the SNP, because it is quite frightening, I think, for the people in Scotland to consider how much SNP loathing there is towards Israel.
John.
Okay, again, quite a lot of points in there, so I'll try and touch on them and come back to me if I've missed any. I mean, the two football teams in Glasgow, which as people will know as Rangers and Celtic, and I mean, traditionally one of our biggest problems is the hatred between Catholics and Protestants, which allegedly are both parts of the Christian faith, generally with people who have very little faith apart from just tradition. And there is a bit of an element that if Rangers say black, Celtic will say white, and vice versa. So, you know, as I hinted at before, I mean, I think the Celtic support for Palestine is fairly unthinking, and if there is Ranger support for Israel, I fear that is pretty unthinking as well. It's just purely really to oppose the other. And I know there was an Israeli footballer who had quite a hard time at Celtic recently as well. Absolutely, the schools should be teaching history, and then if there's modern studies, I suppose, comes in there as well. The fact, stating a fact like there's 16 million Jews in the world out of 8 billion people, it makes it pretty clear who the minority and who the majority are. And I mean, one Jewish state at the United Nations as compared to all the rest, whatever they are, Muslim, secular, etc. So absolutely, these are the facts, and I think we have to keep stating them. And I mean, others might disagree whether Twitter's a good place to have that debate, but certainly for me, I would take part in some of these debates in social media. I fully accept that that is not everybody's cup of tea, and other people maybe write to newspapers or they do different things. But yeah, we need to emphasize the facts and keep on about that. But we're in a world where, frankly, I mean, even with like vaccines, I actually get more emails telling me how awful the COVID vaccines are and how they caused more problem than COVID. So establishing facts, I'm afraid, is not easy these days, and I'm open to suggestions from anyone else. Lawrence's points, yes. I kind of, if I'm pessimistic, I do think liberal democracy is at risk. And not just because of the questions around Israel or the Jews, but much wider than that. People not having values really and just going along with the flow. And I mean, we've got issues. We had a deal with the Greens, as people may know, in the Scottish Parliament because the SNP is a minority government. Things like conversion therapy, gender recognition reform have been very controversial as well. And again, the politicians have just kind of gone with the flow, didn't want to upset the liberal or progressive branches. So yes, I mean, pandering to Muslims might be one issue, but there's quite a lot of pandering going on to other groups as well. And I fear that's true in the States and here and elsewhere, that politicians who really have, unless they're extreme right-wing type of people who seem to be making some progress in Europe, which I don't particularly favour, but politicians with real values can find it quite difficult to get on and get elected. And again, Laura's point, I think, about education, absolutely, and mentioning, I think that was a good one, the Holocaust Education Trust, because that is something that I've certainly been out to Auschwitz with them, with school groups. And I think that's tremendously valuable. And that's the kind of thing that can actually start swaying people, I think. Because Nicola Sturgeon, who was our ex-First Minister, and, I would not see eye to eye with a number of things, but I know she was very impressed going to Auschwitz with HET. And that kind of thing can make an impact on people. So I think we probably need to be wise as to how we do things, but I do think very highly of what they do. And, and museums around Europe, I mean, everywhere I go, I was in Riga, for example, in the summer, and not a huge museum, but quite a relatively small museum about the Holocaust. And all of these things are valuable in trying to explain what has happened in the past, what real genocide is about, and trying to win people over to get people to understand the facts better.
Thank you. Right, the last three questions, and then once again, I'll ask John to answer. Erica Lindsay. Erica, could you unmute and put your camera on? Then Les Bloom, and then Danielle Orner. Erica. Erica, please, can you unmute? And put your camera on? Okay. Les, well, we can't wait for Erica. Les, can you unmute and put your cameras on? Oh, here's Erica. Erica, you're there. Can you unmute?
Yeah, sorry.
Great. Well done. Erica, over to you.
Technical difficulties. Yeah. Hi, thank you very much, John, for speaking to us. And I accept, obviously, the kind of world we live in, but an area of real frustration is why politicians constantly receive the reality of Hamas, etc., in a completely different way. And it seems to me there are maybe small, it's maybe fragile, there are some moderate Muslim Gazan, expat Gazan activists who will recognize Israel. And to me, those are the people you should be talking to. But by constantly doing nothing about the extremist language in the West, and and kind of treating this extremism, which they're all horrified by, as some kind of free speech, when of course the Human Rights Act doesn't allow hateful free, speech if it's hateful. So I'm just wondering, and it's an area great, why the politicians constantly receive the reality in a different way and won't do this, which in fact will benefit the Israelis and the Gazans and the Palestinians, to allow space for this more moderate, in the line of the Abraham Accords, etc., except you just keep banging on with the same reality across the West.
Thank you, Erica. Les Bloom, could you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah.
Les.
Hello. Yeah, I really want to just echo what people have said before, but I'm going to with a slightly different angle, particularly what Laura said, the first Laura. I'm very concerned that about 20 years back, Israel gave somewhere between autonomy and independence to the Gazans, and every kibbutz was closed, every soldier was taken out, and instead of the Gazans building hotels, generating exports, and I don't know, growing crops, etc., etc. There could have been a nice little oasis in the middle of a desert surrounded by hostility. They spent every single man working hour, it seems, digging tunnels and building rockets, right? And then you get people like George Galloway coming on the air saying Palestinians have got no shoes, Palestinians have got no food, etc., etc., etc. Which is, I mean, George Galloway's right, but the reason they haven't got any food and haven't got any shoes is because their leadership is not allowing them to have shoes and clothes and food. So my question is really, I mean, everybody on listening to me now will probably be agreeing with what I'm saying, but my concern is that I ask my next door neighbour, or Fred Bloggs up the road, or whatever, and they have no idea that Israel pulled out of Gaza 20 years ago. They think Israel was occupying Gaza right up till the middle of last year, when that atrocity happened. So that's the first question. And second question, which I've said before on previous chats, is there are lots of slogans going around, and I think this new century is all about better together is one, which you may know about. Take back control is another, and yes we can, which was etc., etc., etc. But the Jewish cause and the Israeli cause doesn't seem to have one. And I've said this on a previous. I think "Let my people go" should be something we should be shouting from the rooftops. But I don't know how to affect that. So yeah. Anyway, that's.
Thanks very much, Les. Okay. Danielle, have you come off mute? Great, Danielle.
Hi. First, thanks a lot, John, for your principled stand. Very much appreciated. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right, my internet is playing tricks a bit.
Yeah, it's okay.
So, okay, great. So thanks, John, for a principled stand. I have a question regarding allyship. You mentioned Christians. I know that the evangelists are generally very positive in general, but also toward Israel. And I was wondering if you could map a little bit what's going on in different groups. I recently discovered that, and I was a bit saddened by that the Friends, the Quaker, are not as friendly, for instance, as I would have expected, or the friendship is exclusive to one side. And also from what you said about the sectors that are having good relations with Israel right now, I assume you mean the science and tech sectors. Are there other sectors that you think we could build bridge with in Scotland and by extension maybe in England? And then my last question is regarding what you said about peace. I do agree with you, and I feel like for some reason the left has moved from a discourse around peace towards something that's more focused on justice, as if it's either or. But the latter sounds very much like revenge and not peaceful at all. And I was wondering if you had some ideas about how to convince the left back that peace is actually what it should be about, and not revenge and justice.
Thank you, Danielle. John, few questions for you there.
I think some of these questions are way beyond my ability, but I mean, I'm happy to comment. But I think there's theologians and academics who could probably give better answers, but we'll give it a go. I think Erica's point about, why do people believe Hamas? And I think we're back to this, that, and I don't think, again, this applies not just to this situation, but people believe what they want to believe. And I was thinking of an example in scripture. And I remember when Moses was leading the people out of Egypt, the people kind of reinvented history then as well, because they said, when we were back in Egypt, we used to have lots of food and life was great and we had garlic and all sorts of things. And now you've brought us out to the desert and there's no water and there's no nothing. And so I fear it's part of human nature to rewrite history and facts the way we want them to be. And that is certainly happening now. I fear it has happened in the past. But that, again, that doesn't mean we should give up. It means we shouldn't be over optimistic, because just by presenting somebody with the facts doesn't always help. But it certainly, we need to be doing that. And I mean, I've just found the name of the book that we were looking at last night at the cross-party group, which was Adama by Lavi Tidham. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's a historical novel, or a series of historical novels about Israel going backwards from the present time. And so there's different ways, I think, of approaching people. Some people would be more open to that idea of maybe a historical novel, and they'll read that, and that might help them come a bit closer to what has actually happened in the past. Les's point, absolutely. I mean, if all the aid that has gone into Gaza over the years through the United Nations and others had been used to develop the country, it would be a lot better. And I mean, that's why I think it's ridiculous when these people, another word, we've talked about genocide and we've talked about apartheid, but siege is another interesting word that gets thrown around, that Gaza has been under siege for all these years. Well, if Gaza had been under siege for all these years, they wouldn't have got all the weapons in that they have got. And presumably that could also have been aid instead of weapons and tunnels and all the rest of it. And slogans, I'm not a great fan of Better Together. That was the slogan against Scottish independence in 2014. So I am, we could maybe go for a different one, but no, absolutely let my people go and things like that. Again, I think we have to do multiple approaches, but different things appeal to different people. And for some people, it's absolutely scientific fact. Other people, it's maybe indirectly through culture and so on. I mean, there are positives as well. And for example, at the Edinburgh Festival this year, there were quite a number of Jewish comedians. I don't know if there was groups specifically from Israel, but in the past we did have protests when there was groups from Israel at the Edinburgh Festival. I'm not aware of protests that there were this year. So, culture, that these can be different ways. And that maybe leads on to Danielle's question. Well, a couple anyway. The different ways that Scotland and Israel might collaborate. I mean, I think there's investment here. I think we've got a bottled water company. I think it's called Eden Springs, which I think might be Israeli owned. And there was debate about that in the past. So there's lots of these kind of business or, as you suggested, scientific and technical interactions. You asked about the Christian community. So that's quite varied. But somebody, I think we used words like evangelical in the past, and I don't know how knowledgeable people are about the churches, but within any denomination, or certainly some of the denominations, like the Church of Scotland, which is Presbyterian, same with the Church of England or Episcopal Church, there would be quite a spread. So there would be some would be more evangelical, i.e. they believe the scriptures, both yours and ours. And then the more liberal wing wouldn't. And it's the more liberal wing that would tend to be more sympathetic towards Palestine, and the more conservative or evangelical that would be more sympathetic towards Israel. And then you get I mean, within this, we also have the charismatic kind of churches. I don't know, again, if people are familiar, but the idea that of the Holy Spirit and people having gifts and that area, I'll not go into all of that, but they would tend to be more sympathetic as well. But even within my own church, I go to quite a strong Baptist church. It's not a big church. But since I made these comments, we have some people in our church who are incredibly pro-Israel, and they were asking me on Sunday about what was going on. But I had somebody else speaking to me the other week and saying that he thought it was genocide going on in Gaza. So I think that would be true of quite a number of churches, that there'd be quite a variety. But I mean, my email should be available if anyone wants, and if you wanted to go into that question in more detail, I would be very happy to do so.
Sorry. Yeah, okay, well done.
Okay.
Great, well, thanks ever so much. So that brings us almost to the end. I just wanted to say that we've got 2 more meetings this month. 1 week today, on the Thursday, the 12th of September, we have an Israeli political commentator called Yair Zivan. Is going to come to talk to us. He believes that centrism is the solution to extremism and polarization, but he will certainly answer questions on all matters concerning current developments in Israel and Israeli society. And then the next one we have is on Tuesday, the 24th of September. We have Andrew Fox, who is a research fellow for the Henry Jackson Society. He's going to talk to us about a very important topic, the lies and the lawfare against Israel. So I hope that you will all come to those events. And now the last thing now is for me to ask Lawrence Julius, who's our vice chairman, to propose a vote of thanks. Lawrence.
Right, much easier than the question I asked you, I tell you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for standing up for what you feel is right, which is increasingly and unfortunately more and more uncommon amongst politicians. So a big thank you for that. Thank you again for a stimulating discussion. Your knowledge and appreciation of what's happening is appreciated. You're not just following the crowd. Your understanding and depth was amazing, Emily. Thank you very much. And I hope to meet you in person to discuss these things further sometime in the future.
Thank you, Lawrence. And on that note, can I also thank John and wish everyone a wonderful evening, and hope to see all of you on the 12th, a week today, on the 12th of September for our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.